Why do relationships that on the surface look very healthy sometimes fail? You might have seen a couple like this before. Maybe you've been in a relationship like this yourself. From the outside, everything looks good. They get along well, there are no screaming matches, no obvious red flags, nothing that would make you think, this relationship is in trouble. Yet, it ends up failing. And I'm not talking about new relationships here. I'm talking about long-term relationships that have lasted many, many years. Relationships where, after so many years together, eventually someone decides to call it off and break up. So what is going on? In these relationships, nobody's being abusive or controlling. It's actually pretty peaceful and very cordial. But the relationship ends up falling apart anyway. To outsiders looking into this type of relationship, it's very perplexing because nobody expects it. It's just kind of out of the blue. We often assume that relationships die because there's a massive betrayal, or because there's abuse, or somebody's being very controlling, or being very mean. And though that can absolutely be the case, that is not what today's video is going to be about. Today's video is going to be all about why people in relatively healthy looking relationships fall out of love. That being said, let's start. The first major reason comes from the work of Dr. Sue Johnson. Dr. Sue Johnson created emotionally focused therapy, and she identified this pattern that she called the Protest Polka. It's a destructive pattern that couples fall into when they're feeling disconnected. And this cycle is really important to understand because it explains how people become detached from each other. You see, at one point you become attached to your partner, and you're madly in love, and everything is healthy and good. However, through time, that attachment tends to maybe fade away as problems develop in the relationship. So, let me walk you through how the Protest Polka typically unfolds. In most relationships, there's usually one person who starts asking or requesting the other person to make a particular change. This particular change could be something like, "Hey, I need you to be more emotionally available. I need you to be closer to me." It could also be something more practical like, "Hey, I need more help around the house." Or it could be something deeper like, "I need to feel like I matter to you." Now, when this request is made, the other person might temporarily make that change. They might become a little bit more emotionally available, or maybe they'll help around the house for a short period of time, or maybe they don't make that change at all. It really varies from one couple to the next. But here's what happens. Eventually, the person has to remind the other person again, like, "I need you to be more emotionally available," or "I need you to do this more often." And you can kind of go through this cycle where the other person might make short-term changes and then revert back, or they might just act like they never listened to the request in the first place. Sometimes they get really defensive, they may shut down or take it really personally. There's really a lot of variation in how people take feedback that is uncomfortable to hear. And that's because receiving that type of feedback can really hurt, especially because one can interpret it as lacking in some type of way. And what ends up happening is this pattern goes on, sometimes for months or sometimes even for years. Now, understanding this cycle, the Protest Polka, is absolutely crucial to saving relationships before they reach the point of no return. The next part of the cycle is as time goes on, the person asking for change becomes really desperate. So it goes from protesting, just calmly asking and requesting, to full desperation. And desperation is when it becomes like a cry for the other person to finally make a change. This is where maybe there's a lot of yelling, or they're really expressing intense emotions. The person in desperation mode is suddenly screaming for the person to make that particular change, to be more emotionally available, to be more understanding, to help around more. It really sounds like a Hail Mary. They're really saying, "Please, I need you to make this change." And one of two things happens at this point. The first probability is that the person finally gets it and the relationship is temporarily saved. But here's the problem with that outcome. You've now conditioned the person who's asking to simply yell when change is needed. And this is because saying it calmly didn't work for months or even years. So you've essentially taught the system that desperation is what gets results. And obviously, the other person has to yell to be heard. And obviously, when the other person has to yell to be heard, it might set the other person who's receiving the yelling to become more avoidant. So really, once it gets to the desperate mode, the relationship is in a very fragile spot. It's a bit of a lose-lose situation right there. Still, as a therapist, I would say if the person makes the change in this desperate mode, it is still better than not making the change at all. But there's got to be a lot of work that has to happen to be able to repair that dynamic, because you have now taught the nervous system that something is very unhealthy. The second possibility, and this happens very often, is that the person does not make the change. And when that happens, the person who's asking and begging for change finally gets the message. This person will not change. They will not make the attempt to change. And this leaves the person who's been asking for change with an important realization. And then they begin a bit of a grieving process like, you know what? There was always the potential and the hope that this would change one day, but it hasn't. And then this person begins what is known as the detachment process. And within that process, there might be some sadness, some grief, some depression. But basically, the person goes through this whole process in order to detach. In other words, they fall out of love. So that is how you can see, even if there's no major red flags in a relationship, how a long-term relationship that looks relatively healthy on the outside can break apart. Now, the other way in which healthy-looking relationships on the outside can fall apart is through this concept known as emotional bids. And this comes from the Gottmans, John and Julie Gottman. They were able to study couples in what they called the love lab, and they discovered something absolutely fascinating about emotional bids. So let me explain what an emotional bid is. An emotional bid is a statement or something that you say to another human being with the hope that they will acknowledge it, that they will take it, and that they'll give it some level of importance. It's basically a way for you to be seen and to connect in a relationship. And here's the thing, there are dozens of these little moments each day. So what does it look like to take a bid? Generally speaking, an example of a bid might sound something like this. Hey, at work, my friend Susie broke the vending machine. Now, what does the other person say? Do they just ignore it? Do they downplay it? Do they dismiss it? Do they change the topic? That would be not taking the bid, turning away from it. Or did they take the bid and turn toward it? Did they say, oh my God, I cannot believe she did that. What happened? That would be turning toward the bid. It's a very small moment, but these small moments add up over time. Now, what the Gottmans found out was fascinating. Master couples, the ones that did really well, they turned toward the bid about 86% of the time. And then the couples that the Gottmans were able to predict with 94% accuracy that they would separate would only turn toward the bid around 33% of the time. So that is how important these little moments are. And because they're not these like huge dramatic moments, you're not looking on the outside and going, oh my gosh, that couple is doing awful right now. On the outside, it looks like they seem just fine. And unfortunately, technology can sometimes make taking bids a little harder because we're a little less present with one another. So this can look like you're trying to say something to somebody and then the other person's on their phone checking something and just not acknowledging you or not being present. Now, at the heart of every emotional bid is a deeper question. Do I matter to you? Will you show up emotionally for me? These seemingly small interactions are actually invitations to connect and to be seen. When these bids are received with warmth and presence, trust and closeness will grow. When they're dismissed or overlooked, even unintentionally, feelings of rejection and loneliness really develop. These are the two main components as to how really healthy-looking relationships fall apart. And it's unfortunately this very slow and dragged-out process. It's like a slow death of the relationship, and these two processes can go hand in hand with one another. The emotional bids and the protest polka often reinforce each other in destructive ways. For example, when someone's emotional bids are consistently ignored, they might escalate to the protest polka, making requests for change. And when those requests aren't met, they might stop making bids altogether, which accelerates the detachment process. The good news is that even if you recognize these patterns in your relationship, it is not necessarily too late. Recognizing the cycle is actually the first step to be able to change it. When you can see the pattern, you can start to change the negative dynamic into positive patterns that create connection and emotional safety. The key is awareness, intentionality, and a willingness from both partners to show up differently for each other. That's it for today's video. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel.